Good morning, doctor.
Good morning, Venkatesh. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Welcome, doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just take a moment to introduce the topic as always and then hand over to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Great, great.
So today's topic is ego. And the reason it's part of our series on wellness is really all about balance because ego is one of those things that actually disturbs our internal balance at various levels. It effectively, in some ways, is like one big load that we carry. It places strain on us. It prevents us from managing ourselves and managing our relationships with others. And that's what we're going to delve into. Yeah. Over to you, doctor.
Okay. Thank you, Venkatesh, once again.
Thank you.
Now, if the picture today is the first picture in which somebody is trying to haul up a big weight.
Right.
Yeah. This fellow is working against gravity and is trying to haul up a big stone or a weight called ego.
Right.
And obviously, he's finding it difficult to move and he's stuck. You'll wonder, why is this fellow behaving like this? Why doesn't he shed that ego?
Right.
The problem is his own ego comes in the way of shedding the ego. It may sound paradoxical. If you have ego, you will find shedding the ego more and more difficult. And if you lessen the ego, lessen the weight, things get into a better positive spiral. So ego is something that all of us have and should have to some extent. But the amount of ego that people carry is disproportionate. And many times, you have something to say, Venko?
No, absolutely. I like, like you just said, ego is this additional burden we all carry. I'm sure you're just about to explain what really is ego. But it's different from healthy self-confidence or self-respect. Ego is when it is unhealthy and then it becomes a big burden, right?
Right. Yeah. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Now, in this picture, you see how the word ego came out to be.
Right.
The credit is given to one big famous psychiatrist of the last century.
Right.
His name was Sigmund Freud. He was born in Czechoslovakia, but he virtually did everything in Germany and Austria.
Right.
And people were waiting in queues to get his consultation. Right. And he was extraordinarily intelligent, no doubt. For his times, he was very intelligent. And he devised a modality of how the brain functions. Right. Now, remember, during his time, it was by the end of Second World War or even around that time, there was no electroencephalography. Yeah, you want to say something?
No, I was saying it was even earlier. Much of his work was even before that time. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. So, people had no way of knowing how to find out whether your brain is functioning or your emotions are okay, because people were more interested in emotions.
Correct.
Because brain was not a big deal for them, for the scientists. And brain physiology was the one that baffled them.
Correct.
And so Sigmund Freud worked on how the brain can be and how the brain can function. Correct. And for that, came out with an iceberg model.
Right.
As you all know, iceberg is something that jets out very little above the surface of the water. Right. But the majority of that iceberg is submerged. And Freud said it sounds like a very interesting analogy. Correct. Yeah. Iceberg is hardly visible, but it influences everything so much. Icebergs were the one like even Titanic met its demise. Correct. Literally. Correct. So people were interested in knowing more about the things below the surface, because above the surface, they could manage. But below the surface is something that was baffling everybody. Yeah, any comment, Venku?
No, I think this is very, this is very germane, and actually it's something that so many advances have happened in neuroscience and in psychology and in physiology, which is, how the body works and therefore how the brain works. But this is still a very elegant model with a lot of, even with new information, it's quite easy to understand that all of us have things hidden below and things which are manifest outside. And I guess these three terms, the id, the ego, and the superego, maybe you can touch on that for a minute.
Right. So basically, if you see, the major part of the brain, is
Right.
below the surface. You
Correct.
can't make out what's going on.
Correct.
So that led to a lot of guesswork, and everybody claims to be the expert in the area and so forth.
Correct.
Even today, the major part of our brain function is below the surface, not
Right.
really visible or perceptible.
Correct.
And this hypothesis that you see, there are three parts that Sigmund Freud came out with.
Correct.
One is called id.
Correct.
Id is the most complicated and least understood part of the brain,
Right.
and it is basically subconscious. Id.
Right.
So people gave up working on it because by that time, a lot of advances had taken place in electroencephalography and neuronal function and so forth. So
Right.
people didn't chase too much of what Freud said. So
Correct.
if you look at this, today Freud is not given any importance at all,
Right.
but Freud is highly important historically.
Correct.
And some terms that Freud used are still valid.
Correct.
And of that, the most important thing has been the conscious and the subconscious mind. Conscious is something which you and I can make out. We are conscious of what we are doing, what we are thinking,
Correct.
and we are conscious of how others believe or think or do. And this part again became the subject matter of a big volume of literature on brain function,
Correct.
the conscious function.
Correct.
And whatever is not conscious is subconscious, which somehow people realize you are influencing the subconscious through conscious and vice versa.
Correct.
This may sound a little funny, but today the complications are still very much around and appreciated, but we have better understanding of the brain function because of electrophysiology and neuroscience. Any comment, Venko?
No, absolutely. Maybe I think this was very useful. Maybe I just wanted to simplify a couple of things because I'm sure we're going to use it. I think by
Yeah.
id, quite often, what is at the subconscious level, people are talking about, basic urges, hidden urges, which actually drive a lot of our behavior. And I guess the stuff which you see on the surface is sort of the more rational, or let's say more explainable behaviors. And ego and sort of the sense of the self around that is distinct from the subconscious hidden urges and sort of more basic urges driving things. Is that a fair distinction before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Right.
And pretty you will see moving away from this concept, except that the word ego will continue to dominate our day-to-day conversation
Correct.
and our day-to-day living. So you'll say if somebody is too haughty and too arrogant, you'll say he's got a big ego,
Correct.
and that it becomes and that it ends.
Correct.
But it's really the case.
Correct.
So take a look at the diagram once again.
Correct.
It is totally invisible or imperceptible. So it is below and can't make out what.
Correct.
Ego is something that is commonly used and misinterpreted and misused,
Right.
but it is there, conscious mind.
Correct.
And the superego is the most complicated of all. So it is partly submerged and partly overt.
Right.
So the tripartite breakdown of brain structure and function are by and large valid, but not anymore so, thanks to neuroscience. Today, neuroscience has come and created a big earthquake in the understanding of nerves and the neurons and our behavior. Every little behavior, like going to the temple, you want to go to the temple, you'll say, oh, big deal, going to the temple. But neuroscientists will say temple has so many connotations and he'll complicate your life more. But at the same time, he simplifies it also.
Correct.
So the neuroscientists today have pushed out Freud, and so be it. Today we are better equipped in terms of equipment and in terms of understanding.
Correct.
So we can move on to the next step of our analysis. Any comment again, Nuko?
Just, I think since we were discussing at a higher level, just to bring it a little lower so that we can move on and so that our sort of terminology is clear as we speak. I think when we are saying ego is the enemy, at some level, what we are talking about is not being aware of the hidden component of what drives our preoccupation with ourselves and the damage that can do. I guess in this model, the rational part is sort of maybe a little more understandable and you can deal with it better. Superego, I guess, by his definition was, the moral and larger context. But Very often we
Right,
are, to your point about the low path and the high path, which we keep coming back to, amygdala hijack,
right,
sort of
right,
is at the id level. And the amygdala hijack means responding emotively or responding from a perception of threat, as an example. Ego can be a manifestation of that in our common terminology. In Freud's,
yeah,
it means a little differently, right? So we can
right,
move
right,
on, of course. I just thought
very
I'd clarify that because ego here and ego at the beginning of our deck, or our presentation, have slightly different connotations. We mean ego in the
right,
negative sense, right? Not the healthy sense of self and how we drive ourselves. Fair,
right,
doctor?
right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. So now we can move on to more understandable
Yeah, yeah,
terminologies and institutions.
yeah.
And here there is a Kabir Doha, which tells you how ego can do and undo yourself, your personality, and so forth.
Correct.
Kabir said, "Jab मैं था," there's a bit of a typographical error here. Jab मैं था, tab hari nahi. That means when my means ahamkar is arrogance or
Correct.
haughtiness.
Correct.
When there is haughtiness and ahankar, there is no hurry, there is no room for the divine, there is no room for God's blessing you or otherwise.
Correct.
जब मैं था तब हरि नहीं. Now the next part is a typographical error.
Correct.
जब मैं हूँ तो हरि नहीं. So
Right.
if I am there, Hari is not there. If Hari is there, I am not there. It's a metaphorical way of putting that the presence of God in you, makes you noble and gives you better space for your day-to-day living.
Yeah.
So this is how the Kabir way of understanding was.
Correct.
And it makes sense overall because the vast majority of the human beings,
Right.
the overwhelming majority of human beings believe in this. If there is God, you are not there.
Right.
In presence of God, there is no ego,
Correct.
etc. And vice versa. So next slide, please. So coming back to the good old dictum. The
Right.
dictum is ego is the biggest enemy.
Correct.
And people will say, how do you know? I got a lot of ego and I have no enemies, jokingly. But this is an extension of what Kabir said.
Right.
Ego is the enemy, and ego is pushing out the good things in your brain and in your emotions. And only the kachra is left over there for the rest of the body to live with.
Correct.
So ego is the biggest enemy and will remain so. No matter how your rocket sciences and other things work, ego comes in the way. For example, there is one lady who is stuck in the satellite out there,
Right.
and there are discussions as to how to bring that space capsule down.
Correct.
And egos are at display.
Right.
And you will be wondering, if you look at many of the movies that were made in Hollywood, yeah, rescue missions particularly,
Right.
ego comes in the way of people's rational behavior.
Correct.
So ego is the enemy.
Right.
Yeah, next slide. Yeah, any comment?
No, not at this stage. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think this is a very important one. Yeah.
Next slide. So as an extension of this, jab मैं था तब हरि नहीं, and vice versa, gives you a very simple formula. Einstein gave you E is equal to mc square. Here, the same Einstein is giving you another formula. What is that other formula? It says ego is equal to the reciprocal of one stroke knowledge.
One about knowledge. Yeah. So it's inversely proportional to knowledge. Correct.
Yeah. So if you have ego, there is no room for knowledge, So jab main tha hari nahi,
Correct.
So my ego is taking up all the place, and there is no room for my brain to work to collect knowledge and behave rationally. So Einstein says it, so we have to listen, of course. But it is true.
Correct.
Ego is the inverse of knowledge.
Absolutely.
So if you want to acquire knowledge, you have to shed ego.
Correct.
So this is the philosophy with which we will be looking at today's session, and also for many more sessions to come. Wherever there is a human behavioral aspect confronting us,
Right.
you should know that the more the knowledge you are packing up into your brain, the less the
Ego.
the place for divine feelings. The less is the place for divine feelings. So divinity and knowledge, which leads to arrogance. Basically, Einstein said this in the context of arrogance.
Right.
If you have, which is typically the formula ego here that you see in the slide. If you have ego, you'll have hardly any knowledge. And it is true. Right. Most of our brilliant people in the laboratory and at home and in commerce and so forth, knowledge and ego are clashing with each other.
Right.
Next slide, please.
So I'll maybe share a couple of thoughts, if okay, Doctor.
Yeah. Go ahead, go ahead.
So I think you said a couple of things which I just want to emphasize. The reason why ego clashes with knowledge quite often is, first, you need to
Right,
be humble enough to understand that you don't know everything already, right? You don't know
right,
everything to be known about people's behavior. You don't know everything about yourself. And so only if you are humble enough to say, I don't know, will you collect the knowledge. You use the word collect knowledge. So knowledge won't just
right,
come, you have to collect it. And to do that, you first have to be in a position where you're ready to receive. You'll receive only if you know that you need to receive. So that was one
right,
point that came out of what you said. The
right.
second is that actually, the more you know, the more, I guess, another way of saying the same thing is, you know how little you know. So if you
Hmm.
have studied only first MBBS, let's say before you study MBBS, you think
Right,
that it's just biology. Then you study first MBBS, let us say, and you realize, oh, I have learned anatomy and physiology. But as you study more, you realize how much more there is that you don't know. And so
right,
it's almost that until you know something, you won't know how little you know. Uh,
right,
and so I thought that's very interesting, and that sort of explains why knowledge and ego are sort of zero sum, right? Unless you
right,
accept that you don't know enough, you can't acquire more knowledge, and you can't listen to more people. And I think some of that is coming down the sessions. Yeah.
right.
Thank you, Doctor.
Absolutely. Thank you, thank you. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So why is it that there is a clash between ego and knowledge?
Right.
Knowledge should be reflected in humility, whereas ego is the opposite of that. And that is only reinforced by the observation that ego will never accept the truth. Now, a guy has ego,
Right.
and he has already pushed out other parts of the brain and the brain function. So that ego is enlarged, tremendously. And in that case, nothing can function. So ego cannot accept anything, cannot accept the truth, cannot accept the truth that you don't know, as Venku said.
Right.
So these things are counterproductive at every level. And ego never accepts truth, and that will remain so unless you learn how to accept truths, how to get feed. For example, we say you want feedback.
Right.
Feedback is information, but if you have a lot of ego, you won't get the feedback because you won't accept the feedback, etc. Yeah. Next slide, please.
So maybe one point here, Doctor, I'm just
Yeah,
pulling
go
out
ahead.
from your
Go ahead.
different sessions. See,
Go ahead.
I think today's talk is actually very close to the one of the points you made in the opening talk, and I'm repeating it. The difference
Yeah.
between the high road and the low road, right? Uh,
Yeah.
you don't take the high road. High road being you take a more considered, rational view, and low road is
Right.
when you think that you're under threat and you trigger this flight or fight, right? Which is,
Right.
you either think you need to fight or you need to run away. Ego,
Right.
I think, comes in because the more you are preoccupied with whether you are right or you are all knowing, if anything contradicts that, it triggers fear in you. So instead of
Right.
accepting it, you start fighting it. And
Right.
that's why you don't accept the truth. And that sort of leads you. So in that Freud's diagram, it sort of takes you to id rather than takes
Right.
you to thinking more rationally. And that sort of, I'm connecting the dots across the different things you've said. That
Right.
sort of does that sort of make some sense, Doctor?
Yeah. Plenty of. Actually, you have given an overview of the way neuroanatomy and neurophysiology and neuroscience converge.
Correct.
And besides a hell of a lot of things that our brain does or deals with.
Correct.
So, all right, ego naturally is so preoccupied with itself that others can go to hell. There's a
Correct.
saying in commerce, my way or no way.
Right.
People say when people are arguing, I want this and I don't want that, that kind of heated arguments, they
Correct.
often use the word my way or your way.
Correct.
My way or nobody's way for that matter, because that leads to a hell of a lot of conflict. And a guy who is full of egos will be just pushing out others out of the picture,
Correct.
and others can go to hell.
Correct.
That is the approach that an egoistic
Correct.
man.
Correct.
Yeah. Next slide, please. If you have comment, keep giving, Venkatesh.
Yes, Doctor. Please.
Yeah. There is a word called narcissism. Now, people will find it difficult even to pronounce narcissism. They'll wonder how many CCCs are there, narcissism, and they'll always get the spelling confused. But the word narcissism exists. What does it mean? It is named after a king who was very fond of looking at his own image in the water.
Right.
Those days there were no mirrors, maybe, but he was very fond of looking at his own image in water
Right.
because he was admiring only him and himself. I, me, myself. We say in modern terminology,
Right.
I, me, myself. If somebody asks you who was there, you'll say I, me, and yeah,
Correct.
and myself. I, me, and myself. Now, what does it mean really? It means that you don't have to be the mythological Narcissus who started this word, narcissism, and which is being used extensively in, if somebody is super arrogant, super haughty, super mean, super whatever, he is called as a narcissist.
Right.
And his mind is closed.
Correct.
He won't open his mental windows at all, just
Correct.
like what we saw, like even what Einstein said. We need not get into the neuroscience of narcissism,
Right.
but you'll see many times people are so self-obsessed.
Yeah.
They refuse to look beyond the nose. We say jokingly, you can't see beyond your own nose. That means you can't see anything from anywhere,
Correct.
like that. Or narcissism is a thing that people can use and they do use. It
Correct.
is a very severe form of arrogance and haughtiness and snooty, whatever. And that has to be dealt with. Narcissism is a pathological phenomenon, and that
Of
has to be
self-obsession.
understood, eliminated with due counseling. No, there is no medicine for this narcissism.
Right.
It could be genetics, but that doesn't answer anything.
Right.
You have to learn to counsel people with narcissism. Yeah. Any suggestions, Venko?
No, I think great point. Just one addition, Doctor, and in fact, I think that's another form of narcissism. One is the stereotypical, the self-obsessed person is arrogant, super confident. That is one picture. I think
Right.
increasingly people are also understanding that narcissism can be, let's say, someone who is always self-pitying, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I have all
Yeah.
the problems in the world. That is a different form of narcissism because you are
Yeah.
accepting that other people also have problems, right? You are
Yeah.
not the only person in the world with problems. And so it can take
Yeah.
different forms, right? I'm the only person
Right.
under pressure. I'm the only person who is carrying all the load of the world is a different expression. The reason I mentioned that is I think narcissism and ego, the negative parts of it, can be quite
Yeah.
slippery. Uh, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
there are some people who think I have no ego, but it can show up in these kind of weird ways or sort of not intuitive ways, and that's also something we need to watch out for.
Right. Right. Very true. Very true. So the more the self-occupied, self-preoccupied,
The
self-centered,
self-obsessed, as you call it, yeah, it's obsession
yeah,
whichever way, but obsession with oneself.
yeah. The next slide, please. Now again, a quicker demonstration of the word ego,
Right.
slightly lesser in diameter. But it is everybody who has ego keeps struggling with it and struggling to be a better person, etc., etc. So
It's a
that is
needless
something.
load we need to jettison.
Yes, yes, yes. Now we'll look at it in little detail now.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Now there is a word egoism. Now egoism again similar to narcissism, etc.
Right.
You are dominated by your own ego,
Right.
and your behavior is continuously and continually egocentric.
Correct.
Your thoughts are egocentric, and your actions are egocentric, and therefore you are leading an egoistic life.
Right.
Now, the egotism is another word. We won't get into that, which is different from egoism. So we'll look at only egoism now. So what does it mean? Let's look at some details. Next slide, please. Just a humorous example is a James Bond movie of almost 50 years ago.
Correct.
Now, James Bond was fond of, creating interesting headlines or labels for
The
his
names of the
movie.
movies were interesting. Yeah, this is one of them. Live and
Yeah,
Let Die. Correct.
live and let. Normally we say live and let live.
Correct.
Suppose you have conflict with a person, whether it is one's own spouse or something, or whether it is somebody else. After a little while of tired fighting, will say, okay, man, let it be, forget it, like that. Live and let live was the standard expression. But Ian Fleming changed it to live and let die to add spice or variety to his own movies. And all his movies were provocatively titled. And here you see live and let die. Now, why am I looking at it? To a narcissist, to an egoistic person, living means letting others die. Unless you make
Unless
others
others
die,
die, you can't live. Correct.
you can't live like that. So it exists subconsciously. People may have forgotten James Bond, which is already 40, 50 years old. But James Bond type behavior, title behavior, is very much there. Live and let die. In today's political scene, for example, fight to the finish, or what is happening in Israel and Hamas. Yeah, I won't leave unless you finish off the last member of your clan. Live and let die. And that subconscious feeling is always there, which is pathological. So you are obsessed with the other fellow's death. We won't look at it today because there are aspects that we are going to look at today and in the coming sessions. But this is something live and let die, you can say sarcastically, but it is very much there in your own mind, subconscious, ego and id maybe. Next slide, please. Any comment, Winko?
No, I
Go
think
ahead and make.
no, this is a very, very important point, and I think I'll just only maybe just go one slide back and put the two in context. The whole notion that I am the center, and I think in this sort of is an image of two people, could be a husband and wife or any two people, and both think I'm the center, and therefore they're not listening to the other guy. Each person is saying, "Listen to me," right? And then you can't have a relationship like that. And then if you combine it with this thought, which is that the word nowadays used more, you must of course be aware of it, zero sum. Zero sum, which is basically what you said. I can only thrive if you don't, right? Or if I'm not thriving, it is because you are thriving. And that is not a healthy way. It can only lead to more fracture. And it takes some doing to step back and say, I can thrive, you can thrive, live and let live rather than live and let die. No, thank you so much, doctor. Very, very insightful. Yeah.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, you see the words here, toxic.
Toxic person. Yeah.
Particularly in the corporate world, where people like some very famous, scientists and famous management experts say, have to work so many hundreds of hours if you want to be anybody, anywhere, etc. So that putting down one's foot down and then once you sort of
saying
making
it has
sure
to be
that
fast. This is the only way. Right.
Yeah. Now, we won't name the name of the person. Now, the people said this kind of management style will make you toxic. Now, toxic can become not only in management, but it started in management way, but then it is very much there in every life,
Correct.
Excuse me. So today you can have a toxic husband, you can have a toxic brother, you can have a toxic neighbor. But you cannot have a non-toxic, goody baddie, whatever, whichever combination you want to have. But today, the word not toxic is understood and well placed in today's vocabulary. And toxic person is something that you have to keep in mind. You don't want to be a toxic person. Simple. It may look very rudimentary. Either you are toxic or you are not. They say either you are against us or you are with us. The big army generals used to say, you are either with us or against us. Here we can say you are either toxic or non-toxic. We can say that. Now, toxicity comes in the shape of ego. Why should anybody become toxic unless he is so preoccupied, super preoccupied with his own persona that he'll become arrogant? Any comment, Apu?
No, I was saying absolutely. His way, right? It may be himself, and therefore his preoccupation that you do it my way. There is only my view, right? And that sort of crowds out any other view.
Right. So,
Doctor, just a time check. My apologies for both of us. Maybe 5 or 6 minutes in which we can wrap. Yeah, sorry, doctor.
So, next slide, please. Don't let your ego control you. Your ego should be under your control and not the other way around. So, for which you require a stronger personality who will override the dominating ego. Then you are a better managed person. Next slide, please.
Absolutely, very important point. Yeah.
Now, a couple of examples from our mythology,
Yeah.
and then we can close the session.
Right.
Here you see Duryodhana, the anti-hero of Mahabharata,
Right.
or the villain of Mahabharata, if you like. He was a true villain because he was driving the entire saga of Mahabharata through his own deeds and thoughts, and he was based on the narcissistic entity. Either I live or nobody else lives, or what? I live or nobody else lives, vice versa.
Correct.
Duryodhana didn't want the Pandavas to live at all. He tried his level best to completely finish them, but that didn't happen thanks to the intervention of Sri Krishna, who authored Mahabharata. Now, Duryodhana was given plenty of opportunity to correct himself. He said, Krishna told him, you give the due portion of the Pandavas and let them live.
Correct.
But then there James Bond came and said, live and let die.
Yeah. In fact, just before the war, the Yudhishthira went and said, give me 5 villages. And he said, not even a needle point of territory. Right?
Right.
Absolutely.
That is one example of ego. Next slide, please.
And this is the other. Yeah.
Another example of ego is Narasimha, an avatar of Vishnu.
Right.
And his own son,
or rather Hiranyakashipu,
that's right. Hiranyakashipu's son,
right,
father, was turned out to be the nemesis of his own father, and his own father insisted that everybody in the kingdom worship me and nobody else. There is no god other than me, etc., etc. And Hiranyakashipu got worried, and he got furious, and he asked Prahlada, "Where is your god?" And Prahlada said, "He is everywhere. You lay your hands on it and he is there." And Hiranyakashipu said, "Okay, prove it to me." He pointed out to a pillar nearby, and he said, "Is your God inside the pillar?" And normally one would expect what nonsense. But Prahlada, out of his own intense faith and bhakti, said yes. And then Hiranyakashipu kicked the pillar to test whether Prahlada's God is there or not. And lo and behold, Narsimha Avatar was born, and Narsimha was God and lion together, half God, half lion. And Narsimha came, and Narsimha killed Hiranyakashipu right at the doorstep of his own house. There is a mythological story behind that. We need not look at that.
No, but that's an important one. Yeah, it's an important one. That why don't you just summarize it, Doc?
Yeah.
The fact that Hiranyakashipu thought he was invincible because he had this boon that neither man nor animal, neither inside nor outside, but he thought he knew everything. But obviously, God was larger, or divinity, or everything, universe was larger. And so, while he thought he was invincible or invulnerable, Narasimha proved otherwise.
Right, very true. Thank you, Venkatesh, for elaborating on this point, because this point itself has been the subject of many itihasas and sub stories and sub whatever. How one example led to another, and positive or negative, and so forth. It's a huge itihasa, as they say. But for us, it is enough to show that if you have the faith, and if your faith is so unshakable that you kick whatever you think is there or should be there, and you'll find God in there. You kick the pillar, you find the God. You kick yourself, you find God. You praise yourself, you find God. Like that. You can extend this example a number of times. But Simhavatara was a living example of how man's arrogance undid himself. So these are a couple of examples of ego, big, mega boosted ego. But there are many more. Yeah. So next slide, please.
I think this is the last slide.
Yeah.
So any concluding points, or I'll summarize them?
Yeah, you summarize it. Yeah, it's fine.
No, so I think, Doctor, thank you so much. I think this was a very important point on this journey of discussing why balance is so important for wellness. I think we discussed today that ego is, forget the terminology of ego, id, etc. But effectively, we have a situation where if you're preoccupied with yourself, there is no space for others, for a view of the divine, or for understanding of, everything else that you don't know. It sort of leads to this zero-sum lower path behavior, right? I am at threat if my view and my persona is not the center of the universe. And that has lots of implications for your relationships, for your work, which are all inimical to balance and therefore to wellness, right? Is that a
Good.
quick summary,
Yeah,
doctor?
yeah, yeah, good summarizer, Venkatesh. So you keep good work, and we'll
Thank you,
see you
doctor.
again.
Yeah. See you
Thank
next
you.
week. Thank you so much. Thank you, doctor. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Yeah.